Have you ever delayed a project because you felt it wasn't the right time? Have you ever stared at a blank page or a business plan or a messy room and done absolutely nothing because you didn't know the perfect way to start? Have you ever criticized others for doing things poorly while you produced nothing at all? There is a silent disease that kills more dreams than lack of talent. It kills more futures than bad luck. It is called perfectionism. But let me tell you the truth. Perfectionism is just fear wearing a tuxedo. It is fear pretending to be quality. It is insecurity pretending to be high standards. Today, I want to tell you the story of an architect who never built a thing. A story about why waiting for the perfect moment is the fastest way to freeze to death. Once upon a time, in a dense forest cut by a rushing, cold river, there lived a beaver named Barnaby. Barnaby was not like the other beavers. He was stronger, sharper, and had a vision that no one else possessed. While the other beavers were content to gnaw at any old tree trunk to slap together a dam, Barnaby saw art. Barnaby saw potential. He didn't just want to build a dam. He wanted to build a masterpiece. He wanted to build a structure so symmetrical, so tight, and so magnificent that the river itself would bow down to it. Every morning, the beaver colony would wake up with the sun. The sound of tails slapping the water and teeth gnawing wood would fill the air. It was a chaotic symphony of action. There was Rusty, a beaver with messy fur and a chipped tooth who worked fast. Rusty would drag logs that were crooked. He would use mud that was full of rocks. He would jam branches into gaps without thinking twice. Barnaby would watch Rusty from the riverbank and shake his head in disgust. "Look at that," Barnaby would whisper to himself. "It's sloppy. It's uneven. That log has rot on the left side. It will never hold." He has no respect for the craft, so Barnaby would set out to find his own materials. He would walk past the easy trees near the water. "Too soft," he would say. He would hike up the hill to the great oaks. He would circle a tree for hours, inspecting the bark. "The grain is twisted here," he would mutter. "If I use this, the aesthetic will be ruined." He would find a pine tree, tall and strong, but then notice a small crack near the base. "Compromised," he would declare. "I cannot build my legacy on a cracked foundation." Days turned into weeks. The colony's dam began to rise. It was an ugly thing, truly. It was a patchwork of different woods, mud, and stones. It looked like a pile of garbage from a distance. But behind that ugly wall, a calm, deep pool was forming. The other beavers were safe. They had a home. Barnaby, however, had a pile of 3 logs. Just 3. But oh, they were perfect logs. They were straight. They were stripped of bark. They were polished. Barnaby had spent 4 days just cleaning them. He slept in a temporary hole in the mud, exposed to the wind, dreaming of the palace he would build once he found enough perfect wood. "Why don't you start building, Barnaby?" Rusty asked one day, pausing with a mouthful of mud. "The wind is getting colder." Barnaby straightened his back and looked down at Rusty with pity. "You wouldn't understand, Rusty. You build for now. I build for forever. I am not going to waste my energy on something mediocre. When I build, it will be flawless." Rusty shrugged and went back to work. Barnaby felt a surge of superiority. He told himself he was disciplined. He told himself he had standards. He didn't realize he was actually paralyzed. Summer began to fade. The leaves turned from green to gold and then to a crunchy brown. The air grew sharp. The water in the river became biting cold. The other beavers started packing mud into the cracks of their ugly dam to seal it against the coming frost. They were stocking up food in their underwater lodges. They were ready. Barnaby was still searching. He had found 10 perfect logs now. He had a blueprint in his mind that was breathtaking. But he couldn't start the foundation because the riverbed had too many loose stones. "I need to clear the stones first," he thought. "I can't lay these perfect logs on an imperfect floor." So he spent weeks moving pebbles, one by one, trying to level the riverbed. He was working hard. That's the trick of perfectionism. It feels like work. It feels like effort. Barnaby was exhausted every day. He was moving stones, inspecting trees, planning angles, but he wasn't building. He was preparing to build, and those are 2 very different things. Then the first snow fell. It wasn't a gentle dusting, it was a warning. The temperature plummeted overnight. The edges of the river began to freeze with sharp, jagged ice. The wind howled through the valley like a hungry wolf. The other beavers disappeared into their ugly, safe, warm lodges. They were cozy. They were eating stored bark. They were together. Barnaby stood alone on the riverbank. The wind cut through his fur. He looked at his pile of 10 perfect logs. They were beautiful, they were masterpieces of nature. But 10 logs do not make a home. He tried to move them, but the ground was frozen hard. He tried to gnaw down a new tree, but his teeth chattered so violently from the cold that he couldn't get a grip. The panic set in. For the first time, his arrogance was replaced by a terror so deep it chilled his blood. He had no shelter, he had no food stored. He had only his standards, and his standards offered no heat. He tried to huddle next to his perfect logs, but the wind laughed at him. It blew right over them. He was freezing, his paws were numb. He realized, with a sinking heart, that he might die that night. Perfectionist was about to become a frozen statue of potential. Suddenly, a heavy shadow fell over him. The ground shook with heavy steps. Emerging from the snowy mist was Silas, a massive, ancient grizzly bear. Silas was terrifying. His fur was matted and scarred. One of his ears was torn. He looked like a walking mountain of battles won and lost. He wasn't perfect. He was a survivor. Barnaby was too frozen to run. He just shivered, waiting for the end. Silas looked down at the shivering beaver, then looked at the small pile of perfect logs, and then looked at the ugly, sturdy dam across the river where smoke was rising from the vents. The bear didn't attack. He just let out a low, grumbling laugh that sounded like rocks grinding together. "Beautiful wood you have there, little architect," Silas rumbled. His voice was deep and rough. "The straightest timber I've ever seen. I wanted it to be perfect," Barnaby stuttered, his teeth clicking. Silas leaned down, his giant face inches from Barnaby. "And tell me," the bear whispered, "does the frost care about your straight lines? Does the wind respect your symmetry?" Barnaby couldn't answer. He was crying now, tears freezing on his whiskers. "I just didn't want to make a mistake. I didn't want to build something ugly." The bear sat back on his haunches. "Look at me," Silas commanded. "I have scars on my back from fighting wolves. I have a chipped claw from climbing rocks. My fur is uneven. I am ugly to you, perhaps, but I am alive, and I am warm. You are beautiful. Your logs are beautiful. And you are about to be a beautiful corpse." The bear stood up, blocking the wind for a moment. "Perfect doesn't exist in nature, little one. Nature is messy. Survival is messy. You starved your future to feed your ego. You thought you were better than the others because you refused to build trash. But their trash is keeping them alive, and your perfection is killing you. A messy home keeps you warm. A perfect blueprint keeps you cold." Silas turned to leave, his lesson delivered. If you want to see the sunrise, you better start loving the ugly. You better start building with whatever trash you can find. Because the cold doesn't negotiate with your standards. The bear disappeared into the snow. Barnaby was left alone with the brutal truth. He looked at his perfect logs. Then he looked at a pile of driftwood and mud nearby stuff he had sneered at yesterday. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He didn't measure. Panic and the will to live took over. Barnaby grabbed the ugly driftwood. He slammed it against his perfect logs. It didn't fit. He didn't care. He jammed it in. He clawed up freezing mud, full of rocks and dead leaves, and plastered it over the gaps. He worked with a frenzy he had never known. He bit off branches that were crooked and shoved them into the walls. It was hideous. It was a disaster of engineering. It was lopsided. It was small. It was cramped. But as he packed the last glob of mud over his head, the wind stopped hitting his skin. He crawled inside his tiny, ugly, chaotic shelter. He curled up in a ball. It wasn't a palace. It was barely a hole. But as his body heat began to fill the small space, the shivering stopped. He was safe. Barnaby slept through the storm. When he woke up the next morning, the sun was shining on the snow. He crawled out of his hole. He looked at what he had built. It was the ugliest structure in the forest. It looked like a pile of debris that had been vomited by the river. And yet, Barnaby looked at it with more pride than he had ever felt for his perfect plans. Because this ugly thing was real. This ugly thing had saved his life. From that day on, Barnaby changed. He didn't stop being talented. He didn't stop having a good eye, but he stopped waiting. If the wood was curved, he used it. If the mud was rocky, he used it. He became the most prolific builder in the river, not because he was perfect, but because he was present. He learned that you cannot improve something that does not exist. You have to build it bad before you can make it good. Here is the lesson for you. You are acting like Barnaby. You are holding on to your potential because you are afraid of making something ugly. You are waiting for the perfect time to start the business. The perfect words to write the book, the perfect day to go to the gym. You call it high standards, you call it quality control. But let's be honest, it is cowardice. You are afraid that if you try and produce something average, it means you are average. So you prefer to produce nothing and keep the fantasy that you are a genius. But the world doesn't reward the genius in the head. It rewards the idiot who gets things done. The graveyard is full of people who had perfect plans. The world is run by people who built ugly things and then fix them later. Your perfectionism is not a badge of honor. It is a weight around your neck. It is a cage that keeps you small. Stop analyzing the wood. Stop measuring the riverbed. The winter is coming for you too. The winter of age, the winter of missed opportunities, the winter of regret. Do not let the cold catch you holding a blueprint. Build the dam. Build it crooked. Build it with cracks. Build it wrong, but build it now. Because an imperfect life lived fully is worth 1,000 times more than a perfect life that never started. If this story woke you up, if you are ready to drop the heavy burden of perfection, subscribe to this channel.